All right, thanks for joining us. It is, I believe it's May the 4th. I'm sure you've seen all the memes and the Star Wars. We got through that, so we'll leave that out today. But we do have an Obi-Wan Kenobi type homie
Yes.
joining us today, aka the Smiley. So let's just get
Without
right
further
into it.
ado,
If you don't know Smiley, you should know Smiley. And let's see. Did we get him muted? Can we hear him? Are you still muted on your own, Smiley?
No,
yeah.
I'm still
Oh,
here. Yeah,
Nope.
should be good.
Yeah. I got him muted. That's why. All right.
Oh, yeah.
there we go.
Nice.
All right.
Let's try that again. Take two. All right. Thanks for joining us today. We've got the good friend Smiley's Garden, who now you can hear his human voice communicate through the waves of the internet. And today we're gonna go through some questions, and we
Get
did
it all.
partake a little bit. You gotta get in the
Yep.
right groove. But
Yep.
Get a little loose.
yeah. So today's guest, if you don't know, is Smiley's Garden, and runs a YouTube channel, does some really quality interviews. I really enjoy the interviews. I feel like they're very authentic and just very valuable. I think you really do provide a great service in the conversations that you participate in, and we were lucky enough to go on your show a while ago and really enjoyed that conversation. And so now we're kind of getting our stuff together, so to speak, and we wanted to have you on and ask you a few questions. So welcome
I'm
to the
honored,
show.
man. Really, really honored. You guys rock.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
you
Thank you for
rock.
being here.
Yeah, you rock. So I was having I was having a conversation earlier this week during a consulting conversation, and the guy on the phone, Jacob, was mentioning that the reason why he liked your show is because of all the reading you do. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to say. I was like, "What do you like about Smiley's show so much?" And it's just that the way that you aggregate information, try to digest it, and then communicate it to the community at wide. And one of the interesting things he said is which is something I kind of deal with as well, is like we have a lot of books and we do read, but the question he was wondering is how do you get into reading books as a cannabis grower? You know what I mean? Like not many of us really take that move to jump and like really digest books. Sarah's constantly reading. I definitely go through ebb and flows for sure.
One of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. But like,
Yeah, I'm to be totally honest, man. I'm not one that's ever really been one to just sit and read a book. And then
mm,
I started a business in auto repair, and then like in my career in auto repair was a lot of reading, so I kind of got into
Mm,
that. But like majority of the stuff is just finding really great conversations. Really, there are some really technical talks, but just while you're working in the garden, play that,
mm,
and
yeah.
right.
after a while, some of the stuff's repetitive, you know what I mean? And then you or it kind of clicks with you in a certain way. Somebody new will say something different,
Right.
even though they're saying the same thing, they presented it a little different and it made
Yeah.
more sense to you. So,
Yeah, I think that was the essence of what he was kind of communicating with your channel and why it's valuable to the community. Um, One of the things I was trying to think about of what would be valuable to provide the listeners of this show is one of the things that I appreciate most about your show is that you're just documenting the journey, and you go in on a regular basis and you just kind of show it as it is. And I don't think the average human on the outside of this industry looking in realizes how actually unique that is. And one things that I want to commend you on is it shows that you're legitimately trying to provide a genuine experience that people can benefit from. And I really appreciate that about your show. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for what you're doing, and that you just so confidently just share the experience, good, bad, amazing, indifferent, and that you're inclusive in those processes as well, because maybe that's not what I'm the best at. But um, one thing that I think is always interesting is, did you do other cultivation techniques, or have you always been an organic grower?
no, actually, I started cocoa and house and garden. That's pretty much the run of the mill of what they were trying to jam at you through the grocery store. It was like that,
Sure.
or Canna was the other one
Mhm.
that everybody was going after. But yeah, I spent a year or so doing that and got kind of tired of some of the mix and some of the timing of things, and like, and at the that time I didn't fully understand what some of the bottles did. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
kind of just follow this recipe, and it's, oh, add 5 mils per gallon of this, and you do that,
Hmm.
and I had mixed results, but I had a buddy that always grew, or he had a caregiver that, so anyway, he would always show up and he had the fucking dankest weed every time. And no matter how proud I was of my harvest, he would still show up and have some shit that just like, I hands down, I had to admit, you know what I mean? It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
hands down. And every time I asked him, it was like, well, I'm growing in soil. I'm growing in
Yeah.
soil. And I just, ask him more and more questions. It was like, well, you got to get on the organic thing, man. And like, so that's when I started doing nectar for the gods.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, after shelling out for a few rounds of that, you start going, well, what's in this shit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
start realizing, that there's a lot in there that I could do without having to shell that out. And that's
Right.
just kind of the progression, I think.
Yeah. And then somewhere along the line jumps into the coot mix and did the whole dang thing.
Yeah.
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 I
No,
think we all do that.
that was the big cliff right there, was right. It was mixing your own soil. Like, that's the big
Yeah.
leap.
Yeah. Did you ever do any super soil? Did you go right to the coots mix?
No, I did a ton of research on it.
Mhm.
And the super soil thing, I kind of went down that path, like taking a bunch of notes and just, figuring out the recipe I wanted or whatever. And I don't know, after a while, it just kind of seemed like too much, maybe. I don't know. It just never really resonated with me that was the thing to do. And like
Yeah.
cooking it and stuff kind of was like, well, that's just kind of composting it. And it was
Mhm.
like, so some of those things didn't make sense to me, I guess. And then, yeah, the Coots mix was the one that I kind of settled on, or the Cornell mix, and I don't know, like any of us, I guess I even adjusted it from there. I didn't follow the recipe totally to a T. Um, the biggest part that kind of got me on that was the rice holes,
Yeah.
and having those disappear after one round and about halfway through the second round, and then
Yeah.
the third
That's,
round really you feel it. It's like,
yeah. That's one that's great in ideas, but doesn't really pan out that well. The rice holes break down quite readily, and then you now have no aeration. I think they're a nice component. I think another aspect that people don't realize is when you add that much carbon, you're disrupting the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it can be a nitrogen sink, and they can always kind of be nitrogen hungry. So, kind of an interesting little thing there. Um, from the other styles of cultivation you did, like house and garden and cocoa and whatnot, um, is there one aspect of those cultivation styles that you wish you could do in living soil, or you felt was an advantage in there, or if you felt like you've been able to move everything that works for you quite well into the living soil?
yeah, I mean, really, yeah. There's not much I would really think
Nice.
of there. I mean, yeah, because like the foliar, I still use a pretty, aggressive foliar regimen, I guess, along with the soil. But 2-3 times a week, I'm hitting them with like aloe and something mild, but it's still, what I mean. It's kind of
Right.
part of it, but yeah, not really, nothing.
Nice.
I
Some,
guess silica's always been the one question. Now that you meant, I mean, that would be the one that always came to mind for me switching from soil, was like how available would silica become, or whatnot. That was when I dove into researching a little.
yeah. Well, I think the potassium silicate seems to get in just fine. It seems like a lot of people foliar feed the potassium silicate. They either buy the raw powder themselves and do the solution strength, or people buy Protect. A lot of people want to use PowerSci. In a lot of our consulting work, it's people that used to do hydroponics, so there's a lot of people wanting to incorporate like PowerSci, which wouldn't necessarily be my first choice, but they do. But yeah, we seem to have really good results just with the standard AgSil potassium silicate deal. One of the best things that I've found is uh, being able to combine the aloe vera with the fulvic acid and the potassium silicate. That was something that I learned early on from, he used to go by Incan Llama, now he's the seed source. But he was the first person that kind of downloaded the whole Coots tech to me and was like, start here. And one of the things that he was really adamant about was that foliar recipe of aloe vera, fulvic acid, and potassium silicate. And we've worked with hydroponic farms that had a hard time transitioning into the regulated space and not being able to use things like Eagle 20. And you put them on that aloe vera spray, and a lot of the powdery mildew issues go away. So, kind of interesting. It's an extremely powerful one. I'm not sure where that actually originated. I don't know if that's a Coots recipe or somebody in that kind of trend. I honestly don't know where it comes from, but we've had great success with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. How would you say that living soil just as a practice changed you as a cultivator? Would you say that like you're much different now as a grower?
I am, yeah, man. It's a way more calm approach to things, like I guess before when you'd see something and discolored in a leaf or whatever, I mean, just whatever
Mhm.
weird oddity you saw in the plant, you right away would be like, what do I got to add? How do I fix it? You know what I mean? And it's always kind of like you're in that fix it mode. And like now it's a little more laid back, I guess, in the aspect of where I might see something and it's kind of like, well, let's see how this plays out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like,
Yeah.
because I know I'm not going to be in there trying to fix it, it's kind of like I,
Right.
I got this stuff. So I do soil testing now because I wanted to understand if I had adequate nutrient in the soil, in adequate levels. And then my mind on that was that I could kind of take that out of the equation, so to speak. So now, like, if I'm seeing some kind of an oddity, it's more thinking, well, what's the moisture content in the media, or
Yeah, yeah.
it's just a different line of thinking than trying to be like, how do I fix it with a nutrient.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that was one of the greatest attributes of this kind of whole no-till revolution is it got people to like chill out and be less reactive. I think to a certain degree, some people could be adding activities, I think, but for the most part, it seems like when people simplify the options, I guess, simplify the options and simplify the approach and simplify the reaction, it does lead to a better cultivation experience, I'd say, and because I came from really, I wouldn't say aggressive, but like employed all the available resources, we'll say, hydroponic growers. And so that was a pretty big paradigm shift for me as well to come back and be like, okay, now do nothing, just give aloe vera. And I think that's an important transition for a lot of people to go through to have that correction of that mindset to be able to open yourself to another strategy of being more simple, you know. Um, when you kind of started working through those first living soil rounds, was there any sort of like big moments of like aha or where everything like clicked for you? Where it was like it seemed like there was unrelated aspects and all of a sudden it kind of was like, oh shit.
Yeah, yeah, no. It was about the third round in the soil, trying to flip continuously. So I was just cutting the root ball out in a plug big enough to drop the next one in, and then
Mm-hmm.
going. And I guess the big misnomer that, I mean, really the first brick wall that kind of hit my head was you go into it and people tell you, mix this kind of a recipe in the soil and you're good to go. And a lot of people were talking about how the soil food web's going to feed the plant and it's going to keep this sustainable type thing, and you don't got to do nothing to it. It's water only. And I kind of was going along that line. So like you first mix up the soil, you run through the first run, and everything goes really well. The nutrients are there. Well, now you go to replant in it, and certain levels are lower and certain things, and it's not balanced basically. And then your second round drains even more out of it. Now you go in for the third round, and I lost the rice hulls had disappeared,
Yeah.
and I was out to lunch on where the balance of the soil was by that time. And basically the whole media turned into a hockey puck, and was like so compacted. I mean, it literally was like a hockey puck in it, and some of them
Wow.
became almost like a slime in the
Whoa.
bottom of them, to where it was like a weird like that peat just kind of totally disintegrated to nothing, and it became this weird slime. And those ones almost stunk too in the bottom, and like they
Whoa.
was obviously anaerobic and whatnot. But yeah, that was kind of the first big aha moment, was like, holy shit. these things literally turned into a hockey puck. Like I had to,
Wow.
you know, what I mean, I was like
Yeah.
standing on them, stomping on them, trying to get them to break apart. You know, so
Wow.
That's
That's
involved.
crazy.
That's involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When people get excited about jumping into cannabis, you don't think about like, you need to successfully do this 4 times in a row, and so getting through those, it seems like the second, third, and it doesn't matter if you're doing hydroponics or living soil, that seems to be the real like crux of the mountain, and even in the early days of me helping small farms, it seemed like between the second and third was when a lot of things went wild, you know. So, what would you say is, clearly you're into cannabis, like you're a fan, I'd say, clearly a
I
fan.
think we've established
We've
that.
established big fan, big fan.
Yes.
Is there something that like really excites you or provides enjoyment about this newer style of cultivation? Like, is there something that just is really, you like moms and prop? Do you like the flowering? Do you love trimming? King of trim jail? Who are you?
No, I don't enjoy the trimming part. That's try to stay optimistic about it. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, oh, I guess what was the question again? Like,
Whoops.
how would I?
Oh, just I mean, you're Smiley. You're Smiley's garden. You
Yeah.
seem like predominantly happy guy. Is there something about your cultivation experience that really does bring you that enjoyment? You like, so like for me, I like the daily changes. I'm completely in awe of how rapidly these plants will respond to good, bad, or indifferent. And so
Yeah.
it's like, to me, I like we made a treatment today. We came in 2 days later and they look physically different. So to me, that's my favorite. Trimming's definitely not my favorite, but I did a lot of, I felt like that was the homie thing. Like I did a lot of trimming for people. I feel like that's where people were most vulnerable. So I didn't enjoy trimming, but I got enjoyment out of supporting my crew, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say
so,
it's man, it's super enjoyable when everything is like on point and like you know what I mean. And you show up and all the plants are super green. They're all happy,
yeah,
praying, and everything's there. And it's like I don't know. It's a cool feeling when it goes well. I
yeah.
wouldn't
Yeah.
say I've ever had like a perfect run though. Like there's always some improvements. You know, it's weird how that
Sure.
is, but
Who has had a perfect
Yeah.
run? And if they
Exactly.
are, they're probably putting a filter on it. You know what I mean? So,
She's always
yeah,
teaching us something.
yeah,
That's what I love about her. Always teaching us something.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. How
yeah,
long did
really.
it? Oh, good.
Sorry.
Oh no, yeah, go ahead. I was
I was gonna
just
say,
gonna.
really, one of the biggest like other aha moments was testing my water source and finding out that I had a high level of bicarbonates going into the soil. So not only was I off on the balance of the initial mix, when I came back with another mix and another approach to it, I still had the underlying problem of the water, and it was well water, so it was like 375 parts per
Oh wow.
million or something.
Wow.
So yeah, it wasn't. When I remade the next round of soil and ran, it wasn't only about the second run again that I started noticing weird things going on with it. You know, so
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a major difference from hydroponics. Is most hydroponics people, they just go straight to RO, and so those things get filtered out and kind of flushed down the drain. Um, in my opinion, I think water chemistry is so important that if I was going to start a new grow, the first thing I would do is a water test. Because when you think about something like bicarbonate, you can't really just put a filter on it and pull it out. You can do RO, but it's maybe not necessary for just the bicarbonate. If you have really high bicarbonate and really high sodium, that could be a good candidate for RO filtration. Um, it's hard to find really good information on bicarbonate as well. I feel like I spent a lot of time researching, trying to figure out some answers as to what the numbers were problematic. And of the different things that we've researched, that was one of the more difficult things to really find a hard answer to. But from what I've seen is that once it gets above 200, that's where it starts to cause you problems. And from what I've been told and understand is that once it gets above that level, it starts to disrupt the availability of other nutrients. So it kind of binds to it like a free radical or something, I guess you could say. And so in that case, if you're putting nutrients into your water in a bucket, a lot of those nutrients are getting tied up and they're unavailable to the plant. So, how have you? What solutions have you come up with to try to deal with that?
Uh, nothing
Nothing really.
simple.
Nice. Yeah.
But I did get a high volume like reverse osmosis filter,
Hmm.
which then required me to get a lift pump to raise the pressure enough to push it through there. 'Cause it's got to be like 80 psi or something like
Hmm.
that, and then I had to install a reservoir that has a well pump, and then the well pump draws off that reservoir that after that's filled up from the RO, and then that pushes it, pressurizes the line that I have all blue mots into. So
How have the blue mats been working for you? Do you hate them? Do you love them? You
it's a
marginal?
love hate. It's definitely a love hate.
Yeah, it's a love hate. That's good. Good, authentic answer. Yep.
See both.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of those things where, like, I get it. You can't be mad at the equipment
Yeah.
because it's a mechanical piece and it can only operate as well as you set it up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So,
Yeah.
obviously, if there's a problem, there's something that you didn't set up correctly about or have
Right.
adjusted. But that's the horrible hate part about it is because you're always looking at yourself like, you dummy. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, there's definitely some procedural stuff I've kind of gone to, I guess, after realizing some of the mistakes that can happen. So
Hmm. Have you flooded your joint with them before, or just?
several times.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens for sure.
Yeah, it does happen. A lot of times, that's one of the things that's been on the perpetual list of things to do that hasn't gotten accomplished is a blue mat instructional video. But typically, I find that the main reason for the floods is one of two reasons. If it's right next to a dehumidifier, it's a good way. It just keeps sucking the water out and it just keeps running. So it causes it to. I think it just kind of trips out the blue mat sensor. I think the dehumidifier is pulling the moisture off the top faster than the dripper puts it back, so it just stays on. And then what doesn't get sucked up in the dehumidifier then just kind of floods to the floor. Another thing too, you can bump them. So if you reach in there with a stick or you just barely bump that cap, they don't tend to tighten, but they'll loosen right the F up for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. They do have some caps you can push them on, but you really got to commit because then they're locked in, you know.
Some of the
So,
best tips that I got from you on those actually was to so the length of the brown hose from the carrot should be a similar length from that. That actually helps with a lot of consistency.
yeah.
And then the distance from where the carrot is set in the pot, basically, I mean, that's a real important thing to how it'll function as well.
Yeah.
But one of the steps I've had to go to is basically I transplant, and then there's like 3 stages that I'll go through in veg, and then there's 3 flower rows basically. So every 3 weeks it kind of moves on a 9-week cycle. Um, but one of the things I've had to go to is actually in some of those transitions where I'm moving the pots from row to row. I got to go through and reset those sensors and do it every time. Or basically, what'll happen is they get, for whatever reason, they get a weird bubble that forms in the inside, and it'll just be one. You know what I mean? Out of the 16 or 20 or whatever you
Yeah.
got, right? It'll just be that one, but that's all it took to set that thing, and it won't be able to shut off, is what it basically comes down to.
Mhm.
So it'll kick on, and it won't be able to have the pressure to shut the plunger off.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That is, and the main, yeah, that's the number one problem I'd say. Air bubbles in the carrot itself, because it has to, the water tension is pushing against that ceramic tip, which lifts the water line, and then the water line pushes into the cap, which pinches the tube. So even the slightest air bubble in there will be havoc. And but usually that happens like after a harvest, so they've been sitting, not operating. They don't have the irrigation line rehydrating that zone around the carrot, and then it doesn't fill back up. There's some questions about remineralizing your RO. Do you do anything to remineralize your RO?
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. We usually maybe use a little bit of fulvic acid or something. You get a little bit of benefit that way. I think Elaine talks about how the RO creates an osmosis problem, and then it'll actually cause some of the bacteria to lyse. But we've never really spent the effort trying to quantify that. But in theory, I think it makes perfectly good sense that some of them would die, but it wonders how much, you know?
Well, we do see disruption in the establishment
Mhm.
of the organisms. They don't seem to want to establish very well, so there's something antagonistic going on. So we
Yeah.
do see that. But we haven't done like side-by-side trials of, you know what I mean, rigorous scientific. It's just more like observationally, this is what we're seeing when
See, my
it's just straight
understanding
RO.
of like RO would be, I guess the way I looked at it is it's almost like an empty dump truck, right? Like and then it can pick up things just like water, because water is a solvent. So like,
Mhm.
yeah, so it would be able to hold more things in solution than a water with like 300 parts per million already in
Mhm.
it, right?
Yep.
So I don't know that it like, because I've heard a lot of people say that like it'll pull minerals away from things, but I don't know that the draw is that strong with the solution to do that. But
Right.
and and really, if it's not running out of the pot, it wouldn't be necessarily taking soluble nutrients away from the media either.
Right. And I mean, how long does it take nutrients away? It probably just draws on them until it gets to like 100 ppms or something. It probably doesn't take much to get 100 ppms into the RO water from your soil as soon as it hits the soil. If we deal with well, if you're running RO water through the blue mats, that definitely can be a cause for flood. Do you run the RO through the blue mats?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally.
What do you
Yeah.
mean totally? What are you talking about?
Yeah, so
He's like,
um,
oh yeah, oh horrible.
well, it's making me. No, no, no. I didn't. I know. I didn't mean it like that. Well, I was thinking of a very specific project that was 65,000 square feet that was RO water, and that's about all I can say about it. But it went really bad, really wildly. What I think happens is especially if you fill a carrot with RO water, I think that's where the water tension really comes into play because that system is working off of water tension.
Yeah,
So the characteristics of your soil, the porosity of your soil determines how much tension is on the water in that soil and then surrounding the carrot. And I think it's such a low volume, low pressure, simple system that minor things can throw it out of whack. So I would definitely put maybe 100, 150 ppms of something into the water that you put into the carrot. Preferably, I wouldn't do someone mentioned in the carrot sea salt. That can work to condition your water, but I wouldn't necessarily do it for the blue mats because then you might get scale buildup. But um, we usually use like a trace mineral or something, a little bit of CalMag or something. What I think happens is the water in that RO or the RO water in that carrot is lacking mineral density, so it flows differently than other water sources. So what I believe is happening is the effect on water tension that RO has that I'm not fully comprehending what's happening, just observing what's happening. It kind of slips out the carrot. So as the soil dries down, I think it has the ability to pull that RO water out of the carrot more readily than it would of the other carrot or the other water. Because if you're randomly getting air bubbles, that's what's happening. The water's coming out of the carrot. So if you haven't turned off the irrigation to where that pot's not getting watered, then that carrot should lose water and get air bubbles. So I
yeah.
would maybe we have a little trace mineral product. It is a C product, but it's use just a tiny bit, a little bit of fulvic acid. Maybe try that on a row of pots, see if they flood less. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's an interesting
calcite.
thought.
Hmm.
I can see that though, because it's like you say, it's surface tension. That's
Yeah,
pulling that. So.
yeah, but yeah, one of the first large facilities we installed them in was 65,000 square feet, and they flooded a lot. And it was RO water. They were pretty constrained to how they could condition that water. They didn't really have any option, but nonetheless. There's some questions about why run the blue mats at all and deal with the headache instead of just run regular drip irrigation.
Like on a timer or whatever.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
I get. Um. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my thoughts are the same as like line of thinking that you guys talk with keeping the moisture more
yeah,
consistent,
yeah,
and that was kind of the goal I was going for. In fact, that was something I wanted to ask you.
Mhm.
I got one of those pulse meters, the blue ones or whatever.
Hmm.
And what percentage do you go for on the moisture?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question. So it changes by your soil, what ideal percentage is most ideal. The way that I use that tool personally, um, so it does pair with your phone, so that's an annoyance of people. So there's a couple tricks. I'll just give you all the tricks while we're talking about them. I prefer to not store the battery in it. I even ditch the cover and leave the battery so I can just pop it out. And then I have a mug that fits the meter and doesn't tip over, and I just drop the battery and the meter in there. So one of the things about percentages, it will wander with a low or dying battery. So
Oh,
I think one major drawback to that meter is that it only has one single AA battery. And I think because it has the metal prongs, even when it's off, I think there's an effect on the battery maybe. I don't know. I'm not, I just observed that the batteries die quite quickly. And so when you keep the battery out of it, you get more consistent percentage ratings. I think that's the first goal. Once you start to get consistent percentage ratings, I think the real value of that meter is just going through your room or space and just measuring variations. So that meter does have a history as well. So if you always kind of use it in the same way, then the history going back makes sense, like a roadmap. If you just randomly go here, go here, go here, go here, you can't make much sense out of the history aspect of it. But like in a greenhouse, if you have 4 beds, it's really easy to start in the upper left corner, come down, you know what I'm saying, and just make like a grid. Um, or at least for a single session of taking the meters, like maybe do it across the room or do a whole row, and then look at that whole row. So if you do 6 pots in a row, did they range from 12 to 86? Were they all in 30 to 40? Was it 20 to 50? Generally speaking, when we go back and calibrate it with the microscope, so
Yeah.
using organisms to determine the most ideal percentage, it seems that when that meter is reading a typical soil we use somewhere in the 30s, maybe as high as 42%. And then the calibration kind of screws people up too as well because, if you're supposed to completely saturate a pot, let it run off, let it wait an hour, and then calibrate it. But then if you leave that pot off to the side, once it goes hydrophobic, it now changes as the medium. It's not the same as your soil. A lot of the cocoa doesn't absorb as much water. The peat becomes hydrophobic, so it's just different again. And so you're kind of calibrating to this obscure pot that goes through these violent wet dry cycles. So I personally prefer to just leave it uncalibrated and just choose the cocoa core mixed media and just leave it there. And then keep fresh batteries in it
And use it more like a variation
and use it
tool.
more like a tool of why is this pot 12% and why is this pot 40%? Is one of them correct? The
yeah.
way I use it is to go corner to corner across any size facility to help me determine where the problem areas are going to be. So if you have like 30 pots in your room and you go corner to corner and you notice that the two corners are 12 and the centers are 40, that's going to give you an indication where to start tinkering with blue mats. And then I always use my hand to then go, okay, which one's right? Is 12 right or is 40 right? And I grab a handful.
Yeah.
Sarah made a video of moisture content for compost that's back in our page that explains how we do this. I guess we could make one specific for soil, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, when we calibrate it to the microscope, it's like 35, 40% on the hand test is, where we kind of aim for. It seems that most people's meters, when we dial it in and everything's good biologically, so not too wet biologically or not too dry so that everything's dying, it tends to be in the 30s, maybe 41, 42-ish. But again, it's like my 38 is not going to be your 38, and they might not be completely relevant. It's more about this entire row of pots has a 50% variation. Is that something I want? You know? So I think
No,
that's the
I dig
best use.
that.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
I've
yeah.
always
Moisture
kind of
management.
gone to scanning them really fast with
hmm
one of those laser pyrometers.
Oh, nice.
because you can, yeah, because like whatever section's having a problem will instantly be like 4 or 5 degrees warmer leaf temperature than the other plants around it. So you
Hmm.
can just kind of buzz down a row like that, and then yeah, it'll
So
Nice.
you're doing leaf temperature or you're doing soil temperature?
leaf temperature.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, because the struggling plant's not going to be transpiring as much, and
Right.
then yeah, so like that's like their way of cooling the leaves, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Looks like Gus Grows also likes to use the hand self sixth sense meter.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah,
it's so tough, man. It's like, I come from a hydroponic, measured, quantified background, and it's like, all right, where's my meter? And soil moisture meters, I think, are some of the most lacking areas of all of agriculture. If you look to like hydroponics, there's a plethora of really high quality water content meters appropriate to rock wool, but there's not a lot of great options, and they all kind of have their own little weird tweaks. And I still think the best moisture meter, in my opinion, is the microscope.
Yeah.
Secondary is your hand calibrated with that, I think, so put it in your pots, and it's like, I like the way this plant's performing. I like the low powdery mildew. I like the low pest pressure. This plant looks happy. Soil feels like this. My meter reads 26. Pot feels heavy, whatever, and it's like, okay, on my meter, this one reads 26. Its neighbor reads 12. Is that because it's by the dehumidifier? Is it because it's pissed off? Is it stressed? Did the blue
Virginia
mat
rock.
break? You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So,
often like to, well, I mean, because I'm always on the scope, so I like to, I've just used it to calibrate my intuition of what,
mhm,
what's too moist and what's just enough or what's not enough,
mhm,
So I think I made a comment on the last episode about using the microscope to recalibrate your intuition. That's one of the main things that it really helps you with is that moisture management.
mhm,
So we use that. We'll often take all the data from the whatever meter you're using to get the variability across the space, but couple that with the bioassays. And then I just think that when it comes to moisture management, I don't know that you're with soil anyway, you're not going to really get away from. I don't think you should get away from the hand,
yeah.
using actually feeling the soil and seeing where it's at. But
Every one of the meters is going to double cross you.
no, it's like, would you consider field capacity? So, like, where you add a drop's going to come out kind of scenario. Would you consider that 100% saturation? Then is that kind of the term at field capacity? Is
Well, so that's a technical term. I think, like you hear Jeremy at Build a Soil talking about 5% saturation calculations. He talks about that a lot. Um, and so, the soil takes up space, and so you can't fill it up with 100% water. So if you say 100% saturated, I think that's where it can't be 100% water. It can be 100% saturated, which I think they would maybe term as field capacity. I use similar calculations for trying to figure out how much water goes into a bed. That 5 to 8% is pretty reasonable, actually. Obviously it depends on the soil and different variabilities, but like a general consideration, that 5 to 8% does seem to be pretty appropriate to what people put into their garden. And then where we kind of defer, especially from Build a Soil, is how saturated they want you to get the pot. We never go that saturated. It seems to always turn things anaerobic. So I think the biggest obstacle, especially people coming from cocoa, is that in cocoa it's a must to completely saturate that soil to push all the stale air out, and then you have to let it dry back to refill with air because that's how the air gets pulled back in. But then if you let it go too far, the plants freak out and look like they're dying. Um, so I think a lot of people that we work with when we track the microscopes, they're doing too big of a swing between wet and dry, and I think that's where the blue mat really saves people, because even if it's kind of wandering, at least it's um, holding much more static than hand watering for sure, especially in small containers. Like, when we give the millibar measurements, like if you're supposed to be somewhere around 100 to 120 millibars on the blue mat meter when it's working properly. Um, when it's
yeah,
working properly,
yeah.
and how does that translate to the rest of it?
Yeah.
Um,
So just like on the
It-
squeeze test, when I was doing the squeeze test for the compost, which is not necessarily what you were talking about on field saturation as far as technicalities go, but if you're just to do a squeeze test as Elaine teaches, right? I've learned that scale. On that video I show, so like at the squeeze test on compost anyway, if you get some pooling in between your fingers, and maybe like one drop out, she considers that 50% when we're making compost. So using that particular scale, if you were to do soil, you'd want it to definitely be less than that. You wouldn't want to be able to like have your soil staying at that moisture. You probably wouldn't even want to squeeze it and still hear the moisture. You'd want it something a little less than that. So like he was saying, 30 to 40%. So on the squeeze test, on the way that I learned when I'm using that scale, it would be the 30 to 40%. If you go back and watch that video, that's where I would keep it. That way there's that film of water so that the microbes are able to move about, still do their job, not cyst up, right? Still give the plants all the nutrients they need, but you're not waking anything up, and you get a good ebb and flow of water movement and still that thin film of water that the roots in the plant like.
Yeah. There's a question here I put up about the blue mat I want to address. It's talk about the millibar reading on the blue mat meter. So I tend to say 100 to 120 millibars when the meter is measuring correctly. Blue mat or Sustainable Village does tend to aim people towards 80 to 100. I haven't personally found that when we do the microscope assessment that that's very beneficial. It does keep it more hydrated and saturated to the eye of the grower, which is what people want. And typically when we tend to stride people towards 120, they do feel it is too dry. But when you kind of drill down with the microscope, it does look a little bit different. So I guess contextually is we're also adding feeds periodically. So if you have it on the drier side and you give a deeper watering, which I think is important. So when you talk about cocoa and you do those deep waterings, that's clearly an advantage to cannabis. And if you're only gently top watering with the blue mats, I think you are lacking some of that deep penetration of moisture sometimes. So I don't know. Have you found that there's like a range for you that seems to perform well in your garden that you feel good about? Because I think can be variable as well,
Yeah, there's some variability between because I mix the soil rounds like at different times, and so yeah, there was I don't know different things were available. Like I got I'm trying to think of what they're called again. The grow stone, not grow stone. They were trying to take out place of perlite. They were like recycled glass or whatever.
Mm-hmm. But bigger
yeah.
though, right?
Yeah, they were kind of, and then they like I mixed the first round of soil with that, and then went to get it the next time. Those were gone, and then I got like lava rocks, and then those were gone, and then I ended up with like sand and pea gravel for the last one or whatever. So it's kind of like a bit of a mix, but I do get what you're saying, like the water holding capability of those three different, or four different mixes is.
Yeah.
I've been witnessing that too, to where like trying to just lift the pot doesn't necessarily give me a great assessment because some of the pots have more rocks in it than the other pots, and and looking back on it, it was kind of like one of them hindsight things, like, oh shit, I should have made sure these things all weighed the same, because it's like. That way I can go through and have a better assessment on, which one's wetter, which one's drier. Because, there's a couple pots in there that almost get me every time because they're way heavier than the other ones. So then I'm like, oh, you're good on water, and I'm just checking them real quick. And visually I can see when they're starting to struggle, it's like they get some of the, before they wilt, like that's the thing about the blue mat is you can run them to where they're, not quite wilted or not quite, gonna wilt. Like the lower branches are kind of wilted, but the upper branches still got enough to hang on. And it's pretty.
There was a question in here, or kind of a comment more, so I can't seem to find it right now, but, here it is. But talking about constantly changing varieties of cannabis, it's hard to find the perfect medium for the variation, but in my opinion, isn't that the advantage of living soil? Like we throw them all in there. Have you seen have you seen that your soil tends to keep most things happy, or is it like cocoa in your experience?
No, it's been really great. This the soil testing's been really huge and getting things aligned. Just the big part of it was like the bicarbonates that were coming from the water that were building up, and I didn't change the media, but it brought with it a lot of magnesium.
Hmm.
So like the first few rounds of trying to go and then amend that was like really heavy on the gypsum or the potassium stuff and like trying to get numbers to line up with that. But
Right.
after running it a few rounds, they've kind of come back in line to where yeah things are pretty balanced. But I don't
Let's talk about that because that was probably pretty interesting. And so you've now described that you've got several versions or variations or time periods of soil, and now you're starting to get into serious about the mineral recommendations and adjustments and corrections. Like, what's that been like for your outcome as far as, have you gone to try and dial in those soils separately, or are you amending them together, um, or use it?
No, I basically divide it by the number of pots, so like the
Mm-hmm.
recommendation, because it's basically a yard of soil and
Right.
the number of pots I got, and then I just divide that the amendments for that.
Okay. Nice. Nice. How has that been going though? That was pretty big improvement to your experience is paying attention to soil chemistry.
Oh, it's so eye opening because like
Hmm.
I mean like probably most everybody gets you almost get to where you have a routine of top dressing that you're going to do every round,
Mm-hmm.
regardless. It gets a half cup of this and a cup of that and whatever, and it's
Yeah.
Hmm.
like you kind of settle into a routine after and yeah, man, I wasn't even shooting at the freaking target. You know what I'm saying? Like it was, you know. But how are you? I was basically doing it blindfolded, right? But
Yeah.
how would I know if I was even close to the target? And turns out I wasn't at all. So there was a lot of adjustment. But I've kind of noticed that over the rounds of testing them now, where it's kind of the recommendations are starting to settle down, and like
Hmm.
things are kind of easy into the realm, and it's basically potassium and some calcium and it's all the NPK stuff. Like
Hmm.
I don't know, like duh,
Nice.
right?
No, but
Yeah.
this is what everybody goes through. That's the crazy part, and it's been fairly difficult to come into excess with like really good mineral chemistry advice. You haven't really seen it become readily. I mean, there's a few people. There's been Groru and Soilscape's been doing it for a while, and there's Bryant. Um, and we just started our class, so we're going to shoot out 18 more people that are capable of doing it, which is kind of cool. But even for me, I had to figure this out for my job. Like I came in as the biology guy, wanting to do the biology component, and as soon as we got into that commercial space, it became clear that I also had to be an equal level of understanding of soil chemistry, or we were only ever minimizing problems. Like every single facility we helped, you add biology, powder mildew goes down, yield goes up, potency goes up. But you can't just disregard soil chemistry. And I'm glad to see you're on a routine and you're going through it. It's people don't realize that everything we've done up to this point has been mostly based on a disposable soil. And you do your 2 tablespoons per kilo, whatever, and it's like that stuff always worked. And it clearly worked in those systems, but now we're trying to maintain these soils long term. You have to look at it. So I'm glad to see you doing that too as well. Um, has there been any like big aha moments or kind of periods of like hell yeah once you started getting the mineral, get a couple of amendments in there? Or
Oh man. Well, the big aha moment was when manganese, iron, and copper were the three that were kind of like pretty deficient in the soil.
Mhm.
And yeah, and starting to get those numbers more in line was pretty eye opening. Because I wouldn't. Maybe you guys would know better, but I mean, how how would you describe a manganese deficiency? You know what I'm saying? That
Right, right,
it's not one that's a visual cue
right.
per se, but once you see the plant respond to the, you know what I mean, the addition of it, it's, yeah, it almost adds like an inner glow to it, you know. And
Yeah,
it was just really eye opening for me to see, like, wow, like I would have never known, you know what I mean? Never in a million years would I have been like, oh, I got to add iron, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just
yeah,
some of that stuff don't dawn on you, you know?
yeah. The trace minerals are definitely the most neglected in this whole living soil because we all got moved into this world and told don't do anything, and so people don't do anything. And it is quite difficult to even get people to do a soil test. You're starting to see more people come online with that, which is good. But yeah, even if people are doing some levels of mineral chemistry, they're usually neglecting all or most of the trace minerals. We go all the way down to cobalt, molybdenum, and selenium once they drop below a half part per million. They're a little bit more complicated to get in. They're hard. There's only a few places that make them, and they're usually liquid, which is kind of a headache. But how do you describe?
TM7.
Yeah, TM7 is a great weekly solution for sure. So TM7 was one of the first things we used. We moved away from it and we're back to it. That's a staple that we provide every week. But you still, you know, it's still important that you make these other applications of the trace minerals. As far as function in the plant, manganese, one of the functions that I'm aware of is it helps the plant regulate the uptake of potassium, and especially in excessive potassium situations, if there's not enough manganese, it can't throttle that. It can't the close off the flow for a minute, and so you get, from what I understand, unregulated uptake of potassium, which is an electrolyte. It brings water into the cells, causes them to swell, and they're weak in watering. That's the basis of powdery mildew and pretty much everything else. So getting the levels of manganese in there, there's also a correlation to yield, size of flower, filling of flower. So there's a lot of yield opportunity there by correcting those trace minerals. I'd say of all the things that we've done, when we get like remarks back from farmers of like, wow, that was shocking or provided this dramatic benefit, the compost extract is number one. Number two is adding trace minerals. It's, wild how
And not just
effective.
in a
Yeah.
general sense either. Like, a
Hmm.
lot of people are like, oh, the rock, I added this rock dust and that's my trace minerals. I will tell you right now, I added 3 times the amount of rock dust that anybody puts in a soil. It was like 200 pounds
Hmm.
per yard or whatever the shit was, but it didn't cover it. And that's the point, is it's not gonna, like, how much you, if you look at what manganese is even in the rock dust that you're
Hmm.
using, it's such a minuscule amount. It nowhere near meets what the plant requires, or even is going to be available in that sense. You know what I mean? So, like, yeah, there's some consideration to what people mean when they're like, oh,
Yeah.
I added my micronutrients, and they really mean they put in a cup of azomite, and it's, you know what I mean, it's not a, I don't know, disappointing
Not
to me.
Yeah.
no,
But
it's not.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I'm singing the same song right in front, right with you, man. I just, I think that's the biggest lack in the kind of whole living soil no-till Coots tech is the disregarding of managing trace minerals as a soil volume, not just distributing through TM7. And rock dust doesn't cut it. I do
the
put azomite.
TM7 didn't cut it either, though.
Yeah. Hmm.
To be
Yeah.
honest, it
Yeah.
was, it was adding things other than what it was trying to do, so that it was still, you know what I mean, trying to add the
Exactly.
amount needed for the one micronutrient. I was bringing in so many other ones too. That was the other side of it.
Right. So the problem is you can't just increase manganese by dumping on a buffet, and so keeping those ratios appropriate is really important. Um, nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
Um, we're
Yeah.
getting pretty close to an hour. See if there's some more questions. Give people a question in the comment. Is there anything else that you would have liked to talk about that we haven't covered? Maybe anything new going on in your garden, or what's the series like?
Oh man, everything's getting back on track. I had a vacation. Had some problems for the person watching it. There's
Mhm.
a big leak, I guess, in there that had
Oh
dumped
man.
some water in one of the corners, and that turned out to be a couple plants got powdery mildew on that
Mhm.
side, and yeah, so I had to cut a few down. A few of them went dry, but yeah, everything's back on track and feeling
Yeah.
pretty good with it all now. So
Nice.
it's that's
Excellent.
probably one of the biggest hurdles of gardening too, is like trying to get away, right? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
At least you got to get away. That's good. Yeah,
Yeah. That's been the hardest part for
necessary.
me because we just, when we get away, we go to more cannabis, So it's like we kind of swim in it, which
Yeah.
is cool. But yeah, it's a lot. You got to find a balance. And that was the most difficult part of our personal gardens is not being there like we needed to for those. Um, but yeah, I think, so for those of you that aren't aware of Smiley, check him out on his YouTube. What's the show you got going on right now? You're kind of doing a series, right? So you're checking in once a week or?
yeah, I do on my channel,
Mhm.
the Smileys Garden channel. I do a once a week garden tour. But yeah, basically just me walking through, showing what happened that week and what I got planned for the following week or whatever. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know. It's just one of them things like Eagle. So Eagle Gardens, shout out to Eagle. He's the guy that really got me on doing like a podcast, and he brought up doing the organic takeover and gave me the
Mhm.
opportunity. Like I wouldn't be able to do it with. I mean, I would, but I wouldn't have been able to. I don't know how to do like YouTube, all that. I would have had to
Yeah.
learn all that. So
Mhm.
Eagle gave me the shot and got it going, and then just part of that, you sit and talk about growing enough, and people kind of want to call BS on whatever you said. So I don't know. I just started doing the garden tour. It's like, it is what it is. Here's what I do, and because I'm not really out there trying to pitch anybody to grow a certain way and
Yeah.
or argue with
Yeah.
whatever anybody did. It's just I like talking about what I did, and if that experience helps somebody, and other people talk about what they did, it helps me. So it's
Yeah.
kind of it's just a cooler way to go about it than trying to be Mr. Right, I guess, on
Yeah.
everything.
No,
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's like the results matter, right? So like,
Hmm.
just here's what it is.
Mhm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's the feedback that I've heard about what people appreciate about your show. And I do as well. It just feels really authentic, and you're just showing some insight. A lot of the commercial brands, in a lot of ways, it's very problematic for them to just be live, and consumers don't understand. Like the other day you showed one where one of your plants died. Like if a major brand did that, a lot of times the consumers don't process that and they don't understand that. But like to your audience, it's pure gold. So like the context of those situations. So I think a lot of farms are afraid to communicate some things that aren't maybe going well, or even things that are going well, because then somebody immediately jumps on it, and now you've maybe lost an advantage. So I think it's a really great service what you're doing, just showing your garden, just kind of being authentic and honest about the journey and what it looks like, and giving some reality of what's happening in there. I think that's pretty rad, man. I really do. You
Appreciate
know.
that.
Yeah. So,
I, I definitely have appreciated you guys sharing a lot of info too. Hands
nice.
down, I've learned a ton from that, and I know that's probably one of the biggest eye openers was when understanding like how the effects of that moisture content actually was, and how detailed that can be. Trying to, because like I always kind of took for granted compost, and then to hear how much work you guys actually put into trying to get it a right, what I mean, a right compost.
Yeah.
It brought a lot of that was a big eye opener, I guess. It brought a
Yeah.
lot of like, holy crap, maybe I'm not doing what I think I am when I'm pouring in these bag of, what I mean, these
Hmm.
Yeah.
bugs in a jug or whatever. So,
I
Yeah.
think people's minds would be blown about how dynamic the soil food web network is through varying levels of water and moisture, and how that behaves in your facility. Like the reason why I always mention dehumidifiers is a lot of times the thrips pots are right by the dehumidifier because it's sucking the moisture out of the pot, and so it doesn't allow the establishment of the organisms to get nutrient cycling fast enough to deliver nutrients. And I think a lot of people, sometimes the cultivation experience can be generally overwhelming or consuming, or so many things going on, it's hard to kind of zoom back. And so when we would go through with the microscope, it would allow us to kind of dissect and then zoom way back. So we'd zoom in really far and say, why are these plants showing visible signs of powdery mildew? Well, when you look into it, it seems that the root cause is more saturation, so they're a little bit more anaerobic. And, why is that? And then on the other side, you got thrips, and sometimes they both have thrips, but one's because of not enough moisture and one's because of too much moisture. So, um, just being able to have some sort of device and tool, whether it's you or, the hokey pokey or whatever, have some sort of strategy. Yeah, and, I think the most sensitive piece of electronic equipment on the planet is the human body, but we have to kind of recalibrate to like what's the goal, and just going into your room instead of just charging in to do something. Like, I think that's the real strength of the Living Soil Masanobu. Like, hey, just take a minute, just chill out and just stare at the grow for a minute. Don't just start thrashing around and dreaming of shit to do. Just like, and
There's an intelligence here. Just
yeah, let's see if we
observe
can
for a
figure out
second.
what's going
Yeah.
on. I think that was one of the biggest benefits that I ever got, was like the guys that I learned from would just go in and sit and just not do anything. And they'd go in there after lights out, kick off the lights, and smoke an entire joint and sit there. And I think most of the Hermie issues are that you need like 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust to how dark it is in there, and just being able to just sit in there, just go sit on the floor for half an hour in the middle of the night. I remember,
I just seen that in one of the chats. Somebody was like talking about being able to talk to plants, and like, I don't know how you could talk to your plants, and it's like, well, usually it's just shutting up for a minute and
Oh yeah.
listening. You know what I mean? It's not like
Yeah.
you're actually telling them anything. You just
No.
are
Yeah.
sitting there, shut up and listen.
yeah,
They're talking to you. That's the
Yeah.
thing,
yeah, go
Exactly.
listen to them, not talk to them, right?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like they'll talk to you, in certain ways, like especially if you sit in there for a bit and just kind of try to be quiet. It's like they'll talk to you in ways like, oh, this fan over in the corner is really loud. Why is that fan really loud? Is it hotter over there? Or, what have you, things like that. And just kind of, not to sound too corny, but like listen to the wind, literally. Like go in there and just be still. And, a lot of growers, especially where I come from in the suburban Southern California regions, you were not toting people around with you. Usually you were doing this by yourself and maybe one other person. You didn't show up with 9 dudes to water, or so it's as soon as you show up, it's a mad thrash trying to get everything done on the to-do list that has to get done. And so there wasn't a lot of just giving it 10 minutes and trying to figure out what might be needed, instead of what you dreamed about was necessary as you were driving home from work or driving to the spot, or whatever your cultivation experience and configuration is. you know but right on, man.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of compliments here to you, saying thank you for what you do. And I lost the one, but somebody was saying they thank you for the example you're setting as a leadership role in the Living Soil community. And I would have to agree.
Okay.
Yeah, and so this year I'm working on my delivery, 2022. I'm trying to be a little more smiley with my delivery instead of slapping motherfuckers over the head with this. But I mean, usually the people that prefer just dropping it out, that's who I've just been connecting with, and I guess maybe it's time to be a little bit more universal instead of slapping fools on the head. But
But you be you still though.
yeah, I'm not going to change me, you know.
No, I think
Yeah.
there's certain value in just kind of saying it the way you see it, though.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way we were raised. Like the guys I cultivated with, if you came into the grove talking some corny shit, you might get your ass kicked. Like it wasn't, it was very, you know, pretty militant experience in a lot of ways. It wasn't this like happy-go-lucky, everybody's equal and gets a trophy vibe, that we see other regions. It was like, if you haven't executed this technique and brought us the flower, don't start talking about stuff you heard about on the internet. It was like, what have you done? And it's like certain situations, it was like, please stop talking. It was pretty crazy. So even what I'm delivering of what seems like slapping you over the head, I feel like I'm still like gentle compared to my mentors. So
I had a racing background as well. I actually
yeah,
raced open wheel cars for
hell yeah,
6 years or whatever.
Rad.
But
hell
that's
yeah.
the way
Yeah.
it was. Like in the
Mhm.
pits and whatnot. If you were trying to figure out how to get your car to handle a certain way or whatever it was, there were certain mentors that you could usually find that were in the pits. But it was kind of like taboo to go to 1 to 2 to 3 different guys and then like
Mhm.
somehow combine and mix and match all their advice together and then somehow be like, well, I tried what you said and it didn't work. And that was a
Mhm.
common thing where after a while you're just like, man, I ain't even helping that dude no more because it's like,
100%.
you don't even know where you're at. You don't even know if you
Yeah.
helped him because he went,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like took this guy's advice, that guy's advice, and tries 4 different things. It's like,
Yeah. How do you make heads or tails?
I,
Yeah.
I agree. We were the same way in the pits. We were fairly helpful. We won a lot, so it made it a little bit uh, less tense if you help people set their shit up so they could compete against you. So we actually did a lot of setup of other people's cars, especially once my cousins got into NASCAR, and like we really had it figured out at the local tracks. Like before the big race, 3 or 4 people would come over. We set them up too. But the thing that's identical about racing and identical in cannabis is like the whole setup. A lot of the racers, they take one stance or the other. They either tell you nothing or they tell you everything. And the ones that tell you everything, like he's going to go do 10% of it, say it doesn't work. So it doesn't matter. I'm not afraid to tell him exactly what I'm doing. And it's funny, like growers are exactly like racers that they'll try to take 3 components from completely different contextual situations, meld them together in their situation and try to make something that works. And that's clearly the biggest obstacle for everybody, in my opinion, and trying to see of the different narratives of KNF and No-Till and Coots Tech and Build a Soil and Kiss Organics and this grumpy guy Scott from Crescent Soil and taking all these different things and cherry picking and I think it's clear that like I think in your situation it seems apparent that you've done so many different things. I think that then helps you make sense of it all because you've done cocoa, you've done earthbox, you've done living soil, you've done, so you maybe have a little bit more foundational experience of other successful, I guess, identifying markers of when things are going well. We're having a lot of people now come into this living soil that have had never even seen plant in person, and from that viewpoint, and I guess to get way more down the bird trail rant is I think that's also why a lot of people get really frustrated because they come into living soil and it's like, oh, all you got to do is meditate and throw some water on it once a week and it grows this dankest herb. And it's like, well, kinda, you know what I mean? Like, kinda, And so I think, what the value that I'm trying to provide is here, do this, don't do this. People tend to not respond to don't do this. So I'm just going to let people drown themselves from this point forward, but I'm gonna get more with the to do, I guess you could say. But that's what I like about your show, man. It's like, this is what I'm doing today. This is what's working for me. This is what hasn't been working. I think you provide a great value. I really do. So,
appreciate that.
Just your
Yeah.
energy alone is just, great energy. We need more of that in the
Yeah.
world for sure. Yeah, so
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
yeah, there you go. Let it loose. Ooh, Coach Cal says, the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Just let it loose. It will defend itself.
Yeah.
That's
Self-evident.
deep. Whew. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess on that one, I guess we can kind of adjourn. And again, man, thanks for coming on. And we appreciate what you're doing. Keep it up. If there's any way that we can provide assistance to what you got going on, just let us know. And, just keep doing it, man. I wish you had the reason why I feel like I'm rambling on about the same topic. I wish you could jump into my world for one day and look back at the things that are presented to people and see how yours stands different from that. It is significant. And the authenticity and the reality of your world is so much different than what's being presented from just everything in the industry, and I just don't change that is my request. And just keep doing it, man. Just keep doing it, Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I think with that, we've rambled on, and we'll definitely have to have you back in the next, whenever it makes sense, I guess. And just keep on keeping on, man.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Hanging out with us for a little bit here.
Yep. And again, check in with the homie Smiley.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
See you guys.
Right on, guys.